Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts.
Hello.
What's up, Erik?
Hey,
how are you?
I'm great. It's great to have you. I was just saying in the green room, I feel like we're at Coachella. Hey, Burning Man is going virtual. I wouldn't be surprised if Coachella is as well. Well, everybody, we were super excited and super lucky to have a longtime a friend and collaborator, Justin Kahn, to join us for a fireside chat for all of our Village founders. Justin Kahn, of course, is the founder of Justin TV, when he had the brilliant idea of putting a camera on his head and live streaming his fantastic life. And that eventually evolved into Twitch, which it was live streaming games and became a unicorn. And then started a number of other companies, most recently Atrium, which we'll get into, of course, was a partner at Y Combinator. And yeah, entrepreneur, investor, and Renaissance man. Justin, thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Justin, the first thing I want to cover, and I want to go deep on with you on here, is it seems over the last year or two, you've really gone through a journey, a emotional, spiritual, and mental health journey, and an evolution in how you've approached these topics as an entrepreneur for yourself, but also in your investments and how you recommend to others, and you've written quite a bit about it. Before getting into sort of the practical elements of it, why don't you just walk us through that journey and how that became to become so important to you?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And I love talking about it. So it started off, I started this new company, Atrium. So after, 6 years ago, we sold Twitch to Amazon. And then after that, I was a partner at Y Combinator for a couple of years. That's where you and I met when you were working on Product Hunt. And, I felt like, I had this big exit, and then started to gnaw at me. And I was like, I want to build a bigger company. I had achieved more than we'd ever expected when we set out as founders. But I really, really wanted, I just kept wanting more, and I know it sounds ridiculous. It always seems ridiculous when somebody who is kind of at maybe a stage of success that's like a little further down the road says that, but it's really true. The hedonic treadmill is real, and I wanted more. And I had friends who had bigger companies, like Dropbox or Airbnb or whatever, and I was like, man, I could do that. And so after a few years at YC, where you're more of like a coach, you're a professor, right, at teaching this big college class, basically, I was like, I want to be back in it and start something new. And so in the most mercenary way possible, I came up with an idea that I thought could be really big, which was Atrium. It's kind of this, kind of full stack corporate law firm idea. And it wasn't really my passion. Like, I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't somebody who was super passionate about that, but I thought it was a great business idea. And so I was like, okay, I can do this, and this will empower me to have this big company that I want and fulfill these needs that I think I have, or I did have, right? And I do have. And so what happened was I started this company, and there was a lot of expectations. We raised a lot of money over the course of the company. It was like $75 million. And I was very stressed out about it. As anyone who, I'm sure everybody in the audience has been at times with their startup, but I was extremely stressed. Things were going well. Sometimes things were going poorly. Sometimes the same as always any company. But I was very stressed out, and I was kind of wondering why. Like the academic side of me, kind of more. It was like sitting there, and I was like, why am I so stressed? Even if this fails, kind of objectively, I can go back to doing what I was doing before, which is being a partner at YC or an investor, and like have a lot of resources, and it'll be fine. But I didn't feel like that, right? I didn't feel like things would be fine. I felt that if things didn't work out, it would be the end of the world again, which is exactly how I felt 10 years prior when I was starting Justin TV and Twitch. And that was very alarming to me, I guess, in a way, because it was like, I was very stressed out, and I was like, this is not sustainable. Again, I thought I was done with that part of existence. And so, that kicked off a journey that started about a little over 2 years ago to really figure out why and really find salvation from those stresses. And that's kind of where all this originated. So there were a lot of things that really helped and were parts of the journey. I can dive into those. But, one thing that really helped was I started meditating, and I just started as a way to like try to deal with the stress of every day. So, using Headspace, can I sit down for 5 minutes? And I was not someone who could sit for any length of time, before. I was someone who was, always needed to keep my mind active, and I'd be looking at my phone constantly. And so it was a really hard process for me, but through a bunch of tricks and to keep myself consistent, I've been able to establish a practice, and that really helped calm my mind and be okay with whatever realize that I could be okay with and accept whatever the experience of what was happening in the world was at any given moment. So, if I was in pain, I could accept that. If I was having anxiety about the future of my startup, I could accept that.
Yeah. And talk more about meditation in terms of what you say to people who are skeptical or even just, aren't making time for it, but, you think they should, or what's sort of your pitch to people who are?
Yeah. Well, for people, like I was before, who are very skeptical and maybe, don't like the woo-woo parts of meditation or association with, Eastern religion or philosophies. I would just say, it's kind of like, it's self-care, right? It's like working out. Like exercise has, well-documented positive effects on people's lives, and it's an investment. You might not like working out. I never liked working out. Actually, I was never into it, and but I found that by working out and putting that investment in, I just felt better every day, and I was more productive. Right? I could, maybe I don't think that's the more important part anymore, but at the time it seemed very important. I could like be more productive, have more energy. And meditation is the same thing for your mind. By being calmer and being able to accept your experience of whatever's going on, you are more resilient and able to deal with the stresses, the ups and downs of whatever happens every day, especially in a startup where there's like lots of downs, right? There's lots of things that seem like everything's going off the rails and the world's ending. And before, I didn't have very good coping mechanisms to deal with those situations. I would get drunk and get completely hammered, or I would like not deal with it. I would just like not answer emails that I didn't want to deal with, or like completely shut down. Which is not productive. That's not a healthy way of dealing with your problems. And so by being able to be with my experience of whatever it was, I'm able to, deal with those, confront my problems head on. And I think that was a really important realization for me.
And you gave up alcohol, right?
Yeah. So I quit drinking.
Talk about that journey.
Yeah. So, a year and a half ago, I quit drinking because I was one of those coping mechanisms that I used to escape my experience, right? I was not able to sit with the discomfort of like, I'd have a lot of anxiety over what was happening with the startup. I'm sure most of the audience has felt the same way at times, but I didn't have a way of like being with that experience of having anxiety. Like I'd feel like anxiety. I'd be like, I need this to stop. I got to get away from this. And so getting away involved, there were many things from the unhealthy to the slightly more healthy to the very unhealthy, right? More healthy might be like taking a vacation, right? So I was doing a lot of that. Then there's like maybe like I'm going to drown myself in Netflix or whatever to like, or you watch YouTube, or I'd watch Twitch for like hours just to like get away from my, monkey mind and the anxiety that I was feeling. And then very unhealthy would be like just using alcohol, right? Like as a numbing mechanism to not feel my emotional experience. And when I started to realize that meditation helped, I could sit with it, but also, at a conceptual level, I started to realize that the emotional experience that people have here and dealing with difficult emotions like sadness or anxiety or anger, those emotions are just signals, sensations and signals that you get as a human being, right? That's the gift of being human, is that you have these emotions, which are, processing all this data from the outside world and creating this like complex, taking on this complex data and then creating like running it through your mental model and then coming up with a way that you feel, which is a signal. Like if you're angry, that's a feeling that something's wrong and you want to change the world, right? As it is. And that's not bad. It's not bad to be angry. Now it could be bad how that anger plays out in the world, right? If you manifest it in very unhealthy ways. But realizing that these difficult emotions weren't bad, they weren't negative, and that I could be with them made me less interested in escaping from them. And so alcohol wasn't really serving me anymore. And that's when I kind of made the change.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say about dive into with my wellness journey is that I just experienced drinking ayahuasca for the first time a couple of years ago. And, if you haven't heard about ayahuasca, it's a psychedelic plant medicine that originates in Central and South America, and it's horrible. You drink this foul tasting brew and spend the next 6 hours, like for me, it was like throwing up and kind of rocking back and forth in my own head, like screaming to myself. And immediately afterwards, I was like, why do people do that? That was the most stressful, like tough experience that I've ever had. It was very, I was like, I had these moments of like extreme distress all the way to like, and then moments of extreme calm as well. But one of the things that manifested for me was that I realized that I started to learn about myself for the next year after I drank. I started to learn all these things about myself and how my past experiences were informing my present behaviors, right? I was reliving all of these like experiences from when I was a kid that were formational experiences for me that now were manifesting in how I live my life today. So one example is I realized in my ayahuasca, night, in my ceremony night, my father appeared in front of me and I was screaming at him like, why, I sold this $1 billion company. Why don't you approve of me? Right. And I was like, wow, I never realized I had that issue. And how that manifested kind of through my life as an adult was that I always I realized I didn't get the approval of other people that I wanted when I was a kid. And so as an entrepreneur, I just like really wanted to make it. My drive to be successful and have this, $1 billion company, multi-billion dollar companies or whatever, it was all from this desire to, get the approval of my peers that, I didn't feel like I had been able to get when I was a kid. And so that really, opened my eyes to how kind of some of these behaviors that were unconscious before were manifesting my adult life. And then from there, I could realize not, oh, I don't like this about myself, or I want to, but just that I understand it and I accept it. And I can decide how I want to live in the world moving forward. And if I want that to rule me or not, And so those were some of the big things that really made a difference to me. And then over the last couple of years,
Yeah. I actually never told you about this, but, one thing that you did that moved me a few years ago, even before you started Atrium, was this, you were doing snaps every day.
Yeah.
And, on the bicycle, you did one over, how if you don't love yourself now, you're not going to love yourself later. And so, you $1 billion company won't be enough. $10 billion company won't be enough. $30 billion company won't be enough. And so I say it's sort of a segue as to how do you balance the trade-off between, there's this trope that, only insecure people can build $1 billion companies or, if you're secure, you won't care. How do you balance the trade-off between sort of striving for more and having that sort of real ambition to be something that you aren't currently, but also having that sort of sense of self-acceptance? How do you think about that?
That is a good question. And I don't think I know the answer, because when I was working at Atrium and I was becoming calmer and more conscious and comfortable with myself, people would ask me that. And I had one friend, I won't tell you who it is, but he's a $25 billion company. And he's like, that's my edge. My edge is that I'm like, I have this drive to win, and I'm like going to win at all costs, no matter what. And I'm like, yeah, I do torture myself over it. And I do think that helps in some ways. For some people that can help you be successful. For me, it helped a lot. Like I definitely think that, in a way, some of the my reactions and models that I've formed from difficult experiences and the desire to seek approval did drive me to like be very, very successful. I do think that helped a lot in some ways. And I do also think that if I was more comfortable with who I was and less graspy, I would have been more successful in the past. In other, Twitch is a good example, because with Twitch, my co-founder it was really his idea, Emmett's idea, and we were pivoting the company to it. After a year, he was running it, and the ego part of me was like, man, I'm not that needed here. I should go do something else. So I went and started another company. And I was still involved with Twitch, was, basically a board member and kind of at that point, I wasn't playing an active role. And had I stuck around, I think I still was a really good partner to Emmett. And I probably could have done some of the things that he maybe didn't like to do as well, maybe a little bit better. I'm a great fundraiser. So maybe I could have helped on that side, and we could have gone farther as an independent company. So I do think that my own impatience and willing, desire to, get more right then really was positive in some ways for being successful, and also negative in some ways for limiting my success.
I want to get into some of the deeper elements of company building here and use this as sort of a segue for how it relates to that. And let's get into the Atrium journey a bit. How did you decide to pull the plug when you still had so much money in the bank, and how should entrepreneurs be thinking about that? And then let's get into just some of the biggest learnings and lessons learned and things you would have done differently practically in that experience.
Yeah. So we had 25 million. We had 25 million in the bank, actually more than that, when we decided to pull the plug. And the answer was just, there was the startup founder in me, which is like, fuck, just keep going, whatever, figure it out. And then there's the investor in me. And the investor in me is like, I wouldn't invest my own money in this company right now. So how can I continue spending my investors' money? Because this is not a venture scale business. This is what I think, basically applies to a lot of full stack companies. It's a money that, business that venture money is fueling, but doesn't have a core. Hasn't been a real technology change that should drive a 10x better experience, And so that was my, and I feel like that's manifested itself in a lot of companies that have had difficulties. I don't have to go through and name them all, but that have been doing the full stack business in the last 6 months. So to me, that was just, that's what it came down to. And I just didn't believe it was a good use of capital. And so while it was hard and, we did end up laying off a large number of people, I felt like doing the fire drill of having everybody work for another year on something that wouldn't make sense and having to do it in a year and that I didn't believe would be successful, it wasn't worth it, right? Even for the employees that we were laying off, I was like, you're better off spending a year. It's hard now, but they'll be better off spending a year working at a different company that maybe has more successful prospects. So that was how we made the decision, And in terms of lessons learned, there's infinite. I actually made a list for myself. Well, so not infinite. There's a finite list that I made for myself, and there are many. There's I made a set for myself, and then a set about the company. For myself, it's just I knew I should have. Well, I didn't know then, but I should have worked on, on something where I was intrinsically motivated. Working on something where there was, it was purely extrinsic motivation is not a healthy thing to do. I think, you can't skip the product market development phase. Money does not help you find product market development fit. You need to actually get there, talk to your customers. Starting slow, I actually think starting slow to go fast later. I always wanted to go fast and just be a big company, but skipping that early stage, I think was very not good in the end of it. Obviously hiring tons of people, that's
100 people.
We were 180 people. Hiring lots of people is not a good way to create a nimble company, right? You should, I think it's if I start a new company, I would want to have as few people as possible, whereas I think that I was so obsessed with building the cargo cult of a big company really quickly that I kind of skipped a lot of early steps. And I was because I'm a second time founder and I have all these resources, I can afford to skip those steps. And I don't think that that's very doable anymore. And so, those are some of the big lessons.
What else on sort of organization building or hiring or even scaling besides going slower or lessons you either picked up from this experience or other experiences that you make sure to counsel your CEOs?
It's so situation specific. It's hard to give a general rules, but
one of your frameworks is have a second act, for example, as a CEO.
Oh yeah. So I think there's a transition apparent. I actually don't think Atrium was. I think I was trying to get to that point at Atrium way before we actually deserved to. So that was one problem actually. But the second act idea with founders in general is that eventually your role transitions from being the product leader of one thing to building a machine that builds the machine, right? And building an organization that will continue innovating and growing and creating over time. I was trying to do the latter before I had a product that really was a 10x, right? So you have to go through the phases, and I think that's really important. But for those founders who are at the company size, and really this kicks in when you're 1,000 people, maybe, or maybe 500 to 1,000. So probably most, I don't know what the level of founders in the audience is, but it does not apply to most people. But eventually you will have to transition and give up direct control over your the decisions in your app or product or whatever it is, and work more on building the machine. and hiring the organization and figuring out how to kind of create a culture of innovation. And that's something a lot of people struggle with. I had the opposite problem. I was trying to do that from day one and not like worrying about like building a great product.
Yeah. And you mentioned go slow to go fast as it relates to hiring. How do you know whether you're going at the right speed?
Well, I think if you always feel like you're behind on hiring, that's good. I think that's right. I think you want to feel like and if you don't relax your standards, that's really good. I think companies get into problems where they hire because they need someone and they are willing to take anybody, and that's how the decline starts to happen.
Yeah. What's your philosophy behind culture and building culture and making sure the culture remains strong as you evolve?
Yeah, so I think a couple things about that, because I thought about culture a lot at Atrium, but it didn't matter at the end of the day, right? I feel like a lot of people there will say Atrium had a great culture in a bunch of ways, but we didn't succeed as a company. So it's almost a prerequisite that you actually, that it work. I mean, you can overfocus. I think I like overfocused on culture in a way, but the other thing that I think was a mistake was focusing, like the culture has to fit the type of company it is. Like I was trying to run, there's a book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And that's an amazing book that described the type of conscious culture that I actually wanted to work at. Unfortunately, I don't think a operationally intensive company that is trying to squeeze out bips on margin it's very hard to run that way. Maybe it's possible, but I don't know if I could have run it that way. And I don't think the type of people with the type of background that were coming to Atrium were fully embracing working at that kind of company at their highest capacity. And so to me, it's like your culture has to fit your company. Like if you're a high margin software business like Asana, you can have an awesome conscious culture because kind of the business and the way the business runs, so maybe it's a little bit more conducive to it. So I feel like in a way I was trying to run a company with one culture that really required a leader with a different type of who's going to run a business in a different way. And I think that was a problem.
Yeah. And how do you think about managing your own psychology or the broader concept of sort of bring your whole self to work? How do you sometimes you have to put on a face, sometimes you're going through something. How do you think about that as the CEO in terms of, how much do you show versus how much not to show, or,
I think I'm pro authenticity. I'm like a fairly authentic person. I'm pretty open. I mean, I just talked to a bunch of strangers about drinking ayahuasca. Like, I think it's important to be authentic and open. And so for me, one of the things I like to model at work and in my life is just to be honest and open about my emotions. So if I'm feeling upset, I'll say, I'm feeling anger right now. And in the context of being CEO, it's not your fault. You're not doing anything wrong. You didn't make me angry. That anger is just a signal that I feel like something's wrong in this situation. And I want to explain why I think that is. And so to me, that was something that really eased my communication at work. Especially since before I was a very command and control micromanager and kind of upset, impatient and upset if anything was going wrong. I'd be like, not screaming about it, but like really stewing about anything that was, the smallest thing that was going wrong. And I wasn't in touch with my emotional experience and able to communicate that. So it would manifest to the team as like, oh my God, that guy's fucking scary. It's horrible. He's like a dictator or whatever. They thought they were working for Saddam Hussein or something. So, I think that being able to share my emotional experience with my team made me much more of a human being to them and much more relatable and like much more pleasant to work with.
Yeah. You wrote a blog post called The Founder's Guide to Emotions. And you also wrote, about your routine separately, the 5-minute journal, the 7-minute workout, the 10-minute
meditation. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk about the sort of like practical daily routines that you recommend a founder should have or have something like that. And then we can get into, how that relates to sort of the Founder's Guide to Emotions.
Yeah. So things that I found. So once I started doing like meditation, I was like, and seeing benefits, and I was like, oh, I want to do more. Like, what else can I? So, 10 years ago, I thought you couldn't form new habits. I thought that people were kind of baked as they were when they became 18 or whatever, they became an adult, and it was like very hard to change who you were. Who you were was based on like your genetics and how you grew up or whatever. And after I started meditating, I realized I could meditate every day, and the practice was like kind of making me better in a lot of ways and my experience better. I was like, oh, I'm interested in learning more about what can I do to make my experience better. And people who know me know that once I'm into something, I'm like 1,000% into it. If I get into something, I'm like all about it. So I got into this self-improvement kick and I just started trying everything. So that's what led to quitting drinking. The meditation, I've meditated every day for the last 550 days. The exercise, I started saying, I'm going to exercise every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes. And I exercise every day. On average, it's probably 30 minutes, something like that. A mix of things, yoga, cardio, weightlifting. And that was a big one for me. Really, I can tell my mood, I track my mood, and my mood is just much better after I exercise. I started drinking only decaf coffee because I noticed coffee would generate anxiety for me, especially I like coffee a lot. So I drink a couple cups in the afternoon, quit that. And I just only drink decaf, but I can drink as much as I want. I started doing the gratitude journal. So a friend of mine introduced me to 5-minute journal about 2 years ago. And every day since then, I've done this gratitude journal. At first I was very skeptical. I was like, what's that going to do? If writing down what you're thankful for. But after a week, I figured it was only 5 minutes a day, 1 week's investment. That's only 35 minutes. I could try it. Right. So I did it. And I was like, oh, I actually do feel better and more connected with the people around me with this very simple exercise. So I've been doing that. I do this practice where I think about like a negative thing happening to me. Like I visualize a negative oftentimes. So like, I don't know, having a health problem or some sort of tragedy happening or whatever. And I really try to visualize it in as potent of a visualization as possible. And then it's almost like a vaccine or inoculation to like the ups and downs of or the downs that happen throughout your day, because you will experience difficulty no matter who you are and what your circumstance is. And so those are some of the things, I can tell they're working because not just like on a daily basis, I feel, happier and more peaceful in my life. But I had this pretty bad accident about 8 months ago. I went head over head on my bike and my road bike, and I broke both my elbows, just bam, landed like that. And I was kind of incapacitated for a couple of days. I couldn't use either arm. Actually, my left arm was really bad. My right arm was just a kind of minor break, it turns out, but I couldn't use either arm. And my wife was, pulling up my pants and feeding me. She was cutting my food and literally putting a fork in my mouth. And I asked myself every day after I had the accident, would I change things? Like, would I change how, or do I wish this didn't happen? And the answer was always no. I was much more at peace with the experience than I thought I would ever be. And I think that's due to meditation and to this stoic practice of this negative visualization, because I'd already imagined terrible things happening to me. I was kind of like, it's part of life.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of part of life, it's a challenging time to be a CEO. The last few months to be a leader, right? We have COVID, and teams are going remote. We have protests throughout the country, and people who feel really passionate about that over the past couple months. You've written separate blog posts about founder communication and communication is everything, especially as your team scales, and how to write great all hands. I'm curious for just your general advice on founder communication, on CEO communication to your company, and how to do that well, and any frameworks for that. But then also how to do that well in sort of times of great uncertainty from variety of things that are going across the world, and how, if you were still running Atrium today, how you'd be thinking about that at your company.
Well, I guess a couple of thoughts that are probably not that coherent on this. The number one thing is I think you need to think of, like, it's about spending time on it. I feel like the best leaders I know spend a lot of time on their communication to their teams. They're writing letters on Sunday, like a weekly letter to their team, or they're getting feedback on their team communications from people inside their management team and their company, but also people externally, their friends who are CEOs. And I see them investing a lot of time, and I think that's really critically important. The second thing I think is that just really being clear about what your values are as a company, I think is really important. I think people are looking for leadership, like especially employees, especially younger millennial employees. They're looking for they see what's going on in the world and they're not happy with it, and they're looking for outlets. And one of the ways that they feel that they can drive change, which is probably not wrong, is within the company that they work for, right? The younger workforce is the thing that powers Silicon Valley. Right, like Silicon Valley is powered. Like if you're running a digital business, software business, your cost of goods, right, your supply chain is your workforce, your engineering workforce, your designers, your salespeople, and so that workforce has real power to affect change in their companies, and they know that. People are starting to realize that. So I think as a CEO, it's really important that you be clear about your values and communicating, whether they're aligned with, current outside, I would say, external trends that are happening or not, right? Because people are going to expect you to be, they're going to see your company as an outlet for some of those, just the social change they want to see. And I feel like people get into trouble from what I've observed with friends of mine or whatever going through this. They're getting into trouble where they're not clear, or they change over time. They're not, it's kind of like they're just doing whatever will appease whoever's loudest at that moment, but they don't have a clear set of values that they're defining themselves for where they stand on, everything in the world, but also like these specific external, external movements. And I think it's just important to do that up front, and it'll save you a lot of pain. Even if there's people in your company who disagree with you now and want the company to take stronger stances on X, Y, or Z things, I think just being clear is going to save you a lot of pain in the future, because what you see happening is like, it becomes a debate, right? Like where, employees are like, this company should do this. And then the founders are like, okay, they kind of like resist, and then they like give in a little bit, but then it's not good enough. And it just becomes this ongoing like energy suck in the company. And I think it's just much more important to be clear about it.
Yeah. You talked about the habits earlier that founders should, the routines. How do you think about the infrastructure that one should have, whether it's, regular meeting with a coach or sort of regular meeting with peer founders or other just sort of infrastructure that you think founders should build in, or CEOs should build into their professional lives and personal lives? Yeah,
that's a great question. So I'm a member of a number of groups of founders, and I find that to be really helpful to have like a private forum where, the same people over time, where you can get, bounce your ideas and problems off of them in a very honest, unfiltered way. I think that's really critical. I think having a therapist really helped. Having coaches really helps. If you can get someone who's a really, kind of strong coach, is going to tell you how it is, someone that you respect. I think those are all really critical things.
How do you make the most out of the therapist sessions or the coaching sessions?
With coaching, I worked with my coach was this guy, Matt Mochari. He's the coach of a lot of amazing companies. Lambda School, Coinbase, Flexboard, Reddit. And he just, has no filter and will tell you how it is, and also really, really hold you accountable to everything you say. And that was like super valuable to me. And then with therapists, for me, I think I get the most when I'm just really honest and authentic about my experience. And that's what's always helped the most.
Yeah. A lot of companies here are growing and some of them are scaling. How do you think about avoiding politics in your company as you grow, and just setting not just CEO communication, but great communication within the company, and just overall a healthy dynamic?
Yeah. So I think the number one lesson I learned from Atrium was like, you have to create that first team. That's the most important thing to avoid politics. And what I mean by that is I created the first part of Atrium, like I really created an environment where people wanted to impress me. And so it was very political, actually. It was kind of like Game of Thrones. And I did it unconsciously, because like by the way I was communicating, because of like who I was, whatever, people were like, oh, I want to impress Justin. And they wouldn't work together. And when it was really about turning that management layer into like a team where it's like, we are actually like, feel like a team, like a sports team or something, like your head of sales, your head of engineering, your head of product, and your head of marketing or whatever. That's like a team. Like more than when you ask most leaders, like, who's your team? Like if I ask your head of marketing at one of these portfolio companies, who's your team? They'll probably say, oh, it's my direct reports, right? It's my section of the company. But really the team of the company, the first team, should be the executive team layer of the company. And that executive layer should be more honest and trust the other people in that executive layer more than they do with the rest of their organizations. And that is not the case in most companies. But the key to avoiding politics is to create that first team. And how do you do it? It's like how you create any other team. You spend time together, create vulnerability exercises where people trust each other. You could go through theirs in terms of experiences together that, if you go through any sort of like emotional, inducing experience, you become bonded. It's just, it's not a light switch. You got to put in the work.
Yeah. Team ayahuasca sessions, which you all have something under your chairs if you look. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. How do you think about the trade-off between promoting people from within versus bringing people externally, and then more broadly, just career development for your employees?
I'm not the right person to ask about that, but I mean, I'll try my best to answer. But like in terms of career development, I do think people want to know that you're invested in them as a company, especially younger workforce. They want to know you're invested in them. The average tenure in Silicon Valley is like a year now. It's very low. And so people are switching companies because they think they can get a better opportunity elsewhere. Right. And I think that the salve to that in a way is to make people understand that you're invested in them. In terms of developing versus hiring, it really depends on the situation. I think that like sometimes a company's growing too fast where they have to hire, from outside. And I think that's really important. A lot of companies I see flounder because even though they're great companies with great culture with founders who are very passionate, they get stalled because they aren't hiring enough from outside when they get to be a pretty sizable company, And so the answer is not always just promoting within. It's not always us hiring outside. Obviously, there's tons of cases where people hire outside leaders and it's just the wrong culture fit or they don't have the context, and it's a disaster.
Yeah. I want to talk about founder burnout or just founder like disenchantment with the company. And how do you sort of renew that? You talked about the habits in terms of personal health, but in terms of like specific excitement over what you're working on within the company or just where the company is going, how do you think about sort of renewing, excitement and passion for that, but also making sure that you're working on the right thing as the CEO?
Yeah. So I think there's this exercise in the conscious leadership coaching, content. That's the zone of genius exercise. So most founders I know end up in their zone of excellence, which is the things they're good at, but they don't necessarily get energy from doing. So they're like, they are doing the sales because they're good at it, or they're managing the entire team because they're good. And they're smart people. They learn how to manage. They figure it out, but they're slowly being trained because they're doing a bunch of shit they don't like to do. Whereas when in the beginning of the company, they probably were starting this company doing the things they love doing, or at least some of them. And the alternative to that is figuring out how to live in your zone of genius, which is the things that you love doing that give you energy, right? And there's a bunch of things you can do, like a calendar audit to figure out like what in your day gave you energy and what took away energy, and then just try to outsource or insource or have someone else do all the things that are like, took away energy from you. I think that's really important. I think a lot of founders are trapped by, and this is true, actually, a lot of people in general, but founders specifically are trapped by their concept of what is supposed to happen, right? So founders like, a CEO is supposed to manage every, executive leader, executive team member at our company. The CEO is supposed to, sign these major contracts, work on these major contracts. So the CEO is supposed to prepare all the board information and present to the board. But actually a CEO is not supposed to do anything, or like you can just rethink everything from first principles for your own context, right? You're not going to do anything except increase the valuation of your company and grow your business. Like if you have other people who can do any of those specific things that you have this preconceived notion that you should be doing, then you could have those people do them and focus on what your special strength is, the thing that gives you energy, right? And I strongly encourage like lots of friends of mine to, if you don't like doing it, figure out how to get someone else to do it. And hopefully someone for whom that task is in their zone of genius,
And what's the best way to develop that self-awareness or to become more self-aware of one's true, zone of genius?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a calendar audit is a really great exercise where you're like going through, you print out your calendar for the last 4 weeks and then just circle in, you get 2 colored pens, red and blue, and everything that gave you energy, circle in blue, everything that took away energy, circle in red, and everything that's in red, figure out how to not do it or to change it in some way that it will be blue.
Yeah, totally. You've mentioned conscious leadership a couple times, and I'm curious if you can go deeper on it and unpack just some of the biggest lessons you've taken from it, or some of the biggest principles that you take in your CEO development.
Yeah, so I think I talked about one already, which was the emotional side, which is being honest and being in touch with your emotions and being able to honestly communicate them to the people around you. The other 2 kind of major things for me were taking 100% responsibility. So it's going to sound counterintuitive, but as a CEO, I often felt like I had no agency in my life. I was like, I'm in this situation and the world is doing it to me. And really when I changed the context and was able to say like, for these first situations, I put myself in this situation. I started this company and I have hired 180 people and now I've got to lay off a shit ton of people. But like, it could be like, oh, you could see that as like things are happening to me. Like the market didn't accept it. Like the people inside didn't cooperate. They didn't build a good enough business, whatever. Or I could say, here's all the ways that I created this situation for myself. And the ironic thing is the counterintuitive thing is when you have agency, when you feel like you have agency, that you feel a lot better about what is going on in your life. Second thing for me was like curiosity over reactivity. I was a very reactive person, and in a lot of ways that served me. And I was like, okay, what has to be done to fix whatever problems it is so we can get to the next order of magnitude for our business? And I just knock off things of things to do. But the problem with that was I wasn't approaching things with like a curious mindset of like, how can I learn from this situation? And so when I was in a lot of these situations, not happy, and by kind of flipping the script and saying like, what can I learn from this? I just find myself like much more engaged and happy with life in general. It's not just startups. It's like going through my daily life. I have to, I don't know, drive to somewhere to pick something up. And normally I'd be like, oh, I don't want to do an errand or whatever. But when I look at it, like, oh, I get a chance to go like see somebody at this place and like learn something from them. Like, I'm stuck waiting in an airport. That could be happening to me and I could be reactive about it. Or I could have the mindset of like, what can I learn from the people I'm stuck with and like who I can just talk to and maybe make a different human connection, So for me, that was like a completely new way of thinking that really changed my experience.
Yeah. You're undoubtedly going to start another company.
I'm not.
Okay. Let's say if you were, what are lessons, other things that you would do differently? You mentioned some of them: go slow to go fast, nail the initial product. Maybe don't do something in full stack services and raise a ton of venture money. What else would you do differently in terms of the company building function, or where else do you think you need to grow or as a CEO?
Well, I guess I'll just tell you, what I am doing, which is, so I did start working, I love working on new things and I love ideas. And actually for a while I was trying to say, okay, I want to just try to suppress or I guess let go of that part of myself. But I realized that, no, I should accept that part too, and I do love that part. And so I started working on this new app. It's, but it's not a company, right? But I think about, because of my background, I can't help but think about how it in a lot of the ways that I think about companies. So, this app is a habit tracker to help people adopt social, healthy habits like meditation, exercise, and share them with friends so that they can, it creates a social reinforcement to help you hold you accountable, right? So you can kind of like create a group around meditation, like you create a village global group, and then everybody would check in and you could kind of see and help each other with encouragement over time to adopt these habits. And I just want to create something that was based out of love and something that I really wanted to use. It's kind of the app that I wanted. And for the first time ever, I'd never really worked on something that I really wanted myself. I'd always worked on just ideas that I thought would be interesting and cool or could make money or whatever. And so I've been building this app with a couple of friends of mine. And it's almost exactly the opposite of Atrium. It's like, I want to raise no money. It's not a company. It's just a fun project. And I want to not announce it. I haven't announced it to anyone, just like publicly or anything like that. I don't want to not announce it. I just want to work on it for my own intrinsic, because it's intrinsically fun for me. And I want to, like if we hire people, I only want to see people, or we're not going to hire anyone because we're not a company. But as we bring on volunteer friends of ours to help on this project, I only want to work with people who, when I see them, it puts a smile on my face. Like I actually want to see these people, not people like that's a non-negotiable qualification. And, if it ever does work and become something that's maybe more of a business, I wouldn't call it a startup, but maybe like a business that like could pay people to like continue working on it, I would, consider making it more of like a, like a rev share business or like a lifestyle business might be what people would call it, and not a startup, because I feel like the way people, especially in Silicon Valley, think about startups is like, you have to, it's about getting to a destination. You're trying to sell the company or whatever. It's not necessarily about the journey. I don't know. That's just where I'm at in life right now.
Yeah, totally. One thing I've noticed about you is that you get excited about something early, and then other people get excited about it soon. So you spot trends, and the camera on the head, and this live streaming via Snap, and mental health. And one trend I sort of just noticed externally from your tweets, and you don't have to get too into it, but it's broadly like around free speech and freedom of thought and sort of universalism and independent thinking. And I guess I'm curious if there's anything worth sharing about in terms of what moves you there, how that relates to, in CEOs, in company building, you have to be able to, have real conversations with people, and where you expect to go with that, if at all, or just what's interesting to you about that topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess starting with what's concerning, right? I think that there is a global trend. This isn't just in the United States. Of a global illiberal trend, like a lot of the liberal ideals that are, the foundation of Western government and Western politics. The younger people in these countries, including the United States, are less committed to those ideals today than they have in a long time. And to me, that's very alarming, because I think that obviously the United States has a lot of problems. Like, we're in the middle of a huge amount of problems, and it's not a perfect implementation of the ideals of liberalism. But that doesn't mean like the ideal is bad, right? Like, we should strive to get closer to the ideal every day, not just throw out what the goal, say the goalposts were the wrong ones, or the goals are the wrong one. And I worry that the conversation is more in that direction. And so things like, people should be able to have an unfiltered conversation of ideas, even ones that are challenging or touch on difficult subjects. I think that's just really important. And it's important at the micro level in Silicon Valley. If you're starting a company, you don't want to have ideas you can't discuss. There's so many examples from my own career, but just like having the core premise of your product not be working, and then just iterating like A/B tests, but not being able to actually say as a company, like, is this were our core assumptions wrong? Like, I've been there and not asked those questions and then gone down, wasted more and more time on it. And I think having a culture where you can actually have a free discussion of ideas is incredibly important. And I feel that is people's interest in supporting that culture in the West and in America is eroding, because they are finding so much dissatisfaction at various points of our institutions, right? And I think that's a problem. I don't know what the solution is, but it's a huge problem.
How do you think about that within the company itself, in terms of making sure that sort of people who aren't as high up feel empowered to go to the CEO directly if they need to? Or how do you think about sort of levels of communication and sort of creating precedents or frameworks for how to think about it?
Yeah. So I think practically, when you're in a company, you want to be doing a lot of things. You want to be doing skip levels, regular skip levels, where you're doing a roundtable without the managers and talking and just understanding what people think about the company, what's wrong with the company, what could be doing better, what's being done well. It's like feedback. Like, you would get feedback from your users. You want to get filtered feedback from your employees, and then there's all sorts of other things, right? Like engagement surveys. And I guess that's not a way that people feel comfortable coming to you. I mean, for me, I like to try to just talk to people in the company. And I think it's always going to be hard to create that. So like, what I found for myself was there were some people in the company I could really have a personal relationship with at different levels. And I would just try to cultivate that personal relationship and then talk to that person and use them as like a benchmark for kind of the sentiment of the company in general. And, have them encourage other people to be like, oh, Justin's a normal guy. You can just go talk to him. Now, sometimes that worked, sometimes that didn't, but that was the best I could do.
Yeah. And what about just frameworks for thinking about organizational structure in general, in terms of who reports to who, or when you change that, how to change that and how to message it? And how do you think about that?
That's like such a tactical question. I'm like, I feel like you want to, I think that's hard to answer in this kind of context, because it's so context specific, right? Like, it's so specific depending on like what people's various expectations were when they came in, what their expectations are now. Oftentimes it's going to lead to transitions because people aren't going to be happy if you make organizational changes. And that's just like, I don't think I have solved that problem in any way. So, it's kind of like when you get to this, the best advice I can offer, I guess, is like, when you come to this position where you're thinking like, I need to layer this person, or I need to change the organizational structure, whatever, you should go talk to people who have done it before and figure out what did they do well and what did they do wrong.
Yeah. And how about when you mentioned unhappy employee, when you have someone really good, but they're unhappy, and it's rubbing off on other teammates, or they're not doing their best work. What have you seen as the best tactic to sort of get them on the right track, or identify whether they can't be, put on the right track, no matter how talented they are, and get them out accordingly?
Yeah, pay them to quit. So like, what I mean is you should, oftentimes if someone was good or you like them, they're a personal friend or whatever, they used to be good, they used to have a good attitude, maybe they're probably very talented. You're going to feel guilty. You're going to say, oh, this person could come back, or I like them, or whatever. You should just pay them whatever severance or whatever arrangement will get them out the door while you still feel good about your relationship, because people who are negative are a energy suck on your entire team. It's not their fault, right? They're almost certainly going to be happier in a different job. Actually, if they're actively negative and you feel that they're actively negative, you're actually doing them a favor in a way, because they're going to go find a different job that they're going to be happier at. But you doesn't feel like that at the time. And so it's just really important to like not let these situations fester. And so my advice is always just like pay whatever severance it's going to take for you to feel good about it. Be like, have a conversation. I write it out beforehand, and I go to them and I'm almost like reading off the script, because otherwise I don't want to soft pedal it or anything. But I'm like, look, you don't seem happy, and I'm not saying that's your fault, and I'm not accusing you. But for me, it's like when I don't want to work at a situation where I don't want to create a workplace where people feel like I'm torturing them every day, right? Like that's not my aspiration, and I don't feel good about that. So how can we solve this problem? Like here's the options. Like you can become happy, and then if that's the case, they want to go down, then we go through a specific timeline where they guarantee to do that. Or you maybe should find another job, and here's how I can support you in doing that. I can give you severance. I can help you find another job where you'll be happier. And I will use my resources to do that. And I've had that conversation with people, and then we parted on good terms, and then they were gone. And my problem, it all worked out, and they felt good about it because they didn't want to be there.
Totally. I want to use Rachel Craig's question. For the full stack companies that are successful, I guess what separates the ones that are successful from the ones that aren't, or the ones that what are the tips and tricks that they should be thinking about?
What are the ones that are successful?
The full stack companies? Do you call it DoorDash? I don't know.
Okay, DoorDash and Uber, right? Yeah. So I think having a very simple product, right? I think having a product that's simple and repeatable is super important. I think a lot of, Atrium was a very complex product. And I think the hard part is with a very complex product, it's hard to find efficiency gains in software or in process, right? And that's why people pay like experts to do this stuff. So I feel like the simplicity of the product is super important in order to make it scale.
On reach, so you've taken some time off to recharge. I don't want you to explain your whole recharging journey, because it makes some founders jealous who are working dutifully hard. But just as a founder, as CEOs, you mentioned some of the habits you do differently. Are there, or routinely, what are the best recharging, like bang for your buck experiences, or things that you'd recommend founders think about to make sure that they are recharged, to make sure that they have, perspective, can be reflecting accordingly, in addition to the gratitude journal? Were there certain types of trips or certain places that you went as a CEO that you'd recommend?
Well, because it was kind of happened, we shut down the company right before coronavirus. I didn't go anywhere. I do think doing like a meditation retreat is a worthwhile thing to do, or any sort of like retreat where you're in solitude. I used to take a lot of vacations that were distractions, where I would be like getting outside of myself and like, going to, I don't know, party somewhere or whatever. But I think actually something where I took one vacation, I remember a long time ago, like over 10 years ago. And I was very stressed with Justin TV, and I left my phone and I went to Whistler in the summer for 4 days, and I just was by myself, and it was a very nice time to reflect about what I valued and what I cared about. And so I just think going somewhere by yourself is a good thing to do. I don't know, for my, what did I do? Like the last couple of months, I read the entire Wheel of Time series, like just in a row. It's like 14,000 pages, something like that, and that was something.
What is it?
The Wheel of Time. It's the most epic fantasy series ever created. It's like a huge, like 14-volume fantasy series that kind of started off in the early 90s, and the guy was writing them all the way for like 20 years.
Yeah. And for founders who do a meditation retreat, whether it's 1 day or 3 days or longer, what can they expect, or what is that experience like? Or when you take solitude time, what are you doing during that time?
I mean, I think one big part of it is just being more conscious of what is going on in your experience. And like, we're so caught up in the abstraction layers that we've created in society of like, jobs and worries about, I don't know, work that you're doing or working on or projects or whatever, that you're really not getting down to these like lower levels of consciousness and understanding like, what is my experience? Like, oh, I feel these sensations. I am thinking thoughts. I'm hungry. I'm having these emotions. I feel this emotional content or perceptions in my body. And just having that level of consciousness and practicing being at that level of consciousness, without judgment, I guess, without the value judgment that we often apply to our entire experience. Like, oh, I have this pain. It's bad. I need to change it right now. And you're not thinking about anything except like getting out of that situation. But when you're like calming your system down and you're able to sit with it and you're able to say, oh, I feel a sensation. It's painful. And maybe you don't need to do anything about it at that moment. Maybe it's okay. It's a signal. You can choose to ignore or to pay heed depending on the situation. And I think that's very powerful because it increases your ability to act in an uncompelled way. Like it increases your agency in a way of how you want to interact with and deal with life in a way that I think is, we don't often give ourselves that agency. And to me, that's been a very important skill to develop.
Yeah. Agency. That's a perfect thing to wrap on. Justin, I know I and team and many Village founders have really admired, appreciated, and learned from a lot of the writings that you've done on mental health and just speaking a lot about it. And so I want to say thank you for doing that for the broader for the Village community and for the broader founder community. And thank you for sharing some private learnings and lessons with us today on a Saturday.
Awesome. Thanks, Erik. And thanks to everybody.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.